Hello, it's Silver. This is Omega Crafter. So this is one of those games like Enshrouded or Valheim or even Palworld that is an action RPG first and a survival experience second. And also, like Palworld, it's also got some automation elements in it. So you're not looking at a game where you have hunger and thirst meters or anything like that. Instead, it's about a sort of biome-based progression. And as you progress through each of the biomes, you will of course start unlocking more advanced materials, which will allow you to make more advanced crafting stations back at home and expand your base and all that. So the way that it starts is you gotta plop down a statue that represents the core of your city. And you only have one of these at first, so you gotta choose a good place and plop it down. And at that point, it'll give you a small sort of area of influence that you can build within. You can then use some basic resources that you can gather easily in order to expand that area of influence one tile at a time. This is the kind of game that is very heavily sandboxy, by which I mean there's very little in the way of you must do this in this exact order to progress. A lot of it is just based on what you have and what you find. And because of this, you're encouraged to not only make your base just wherever you think would be a good spot, but also to make it kind of whatever shape you want, because you can expand it one tile at a time. This means you can heavily customize exactly what sort of borders your base is going to have and how big it is and what can fit in it and stuff like that, because you're going to be marking out your territory one tile at a time. After you've gotten a bit of territory down, you can start creating some basic production buildings, and this is where you'll run into the main sort of unique mechanic of the game, and that is the Grammys. Now you'll have a buddy Grammy with you at all times. You can customize him a little bit and he will join you on your adventures, following you around. And you can also summon other Grammys from that statue that we talked about earlier. So after you place the statue down, you can interact with it, and one of the things you can do is spend this specific resource you can harvest out in the world to summon more Grammys. And you want these guys because a lot of the stuff around your base takes time, and this game has some pretty significant automation elements in it that allows you to customize what your Grammys do and have them do some stuff for you while you're away. The way that it works is pretty cool. Basically, every Grammy is programmable. They all have a sort of program interface that you can open up individually for each one, including the buddy that's with you at all times. And then you have a whole bunch of different sort of if-then style statements, like you're doing some basic computer programming, and you can slot these into various sort of equation-like instruction sets that makes them do a specific thing. And you can be a little bit more vague to have them do multiple things, or you can be super specific and have them do a more precise task repeatedly. But you simply program in this window using all these various functions, and then you press play. And as soon as you press play, the program will go off to the best of its ability. And then it will keep going off. It'll loop until you press stop, and you can then reprogram them or do various other things. And there are a whole bunch of templates in the game, so that if you're maybe a little bit scared of the system or you don't know how to start, there are plenty of templates that you can load up and will automatically load an example program of that type to help you out. So if you are needing some wood and you go to harvest some wood, you can just program your buddy Grammy to also harvest wood, and then while you're going around chopping down trees, he'll be following you and chopping down other trees to sort of double your speed at harvesting all of this material. And you can do this with all the various things that are harvestable, just to harvest stuff faster. You can even add little optional bits to the program to make it a little bit more complicated, a bit more convenient, like say having him search the area for dropped wood and actually pick it up and bring it to you. That way you don't have to go and hand gather all of the dropped wood from all the felled trees, and you can just keep chopping down trees, and he will occasionally just sort of walk around and bring you the various resource drops. The programs have a sort of radius, an invisible radius that they activate within, and if you're not, say, near trees and you have a chop wood program loaded, then it'll just have like a red error above his head that says, hey, we've searched for trees and there aren't any, but it will continue looping and continue searching. So if you keep exploring and you come across a forest or something, then the program will take action and start chopping trees for you. So it's not a case of like a Rube Goldberg machine where one thing going wrong kind of collapses everything and causes you to have to start over. There are usually various sort of fail states within the programming, and you can fix different parts of it individually instead of having to retool everything at once. And of course, all of the Grammys at home are going to have some different things. You may have a whole bunch of refined pieces of material that you need to make, like some stone plates or some wooden planks or something like that, and you can have the various tables and chests and resource stations all set up in such a way that you can program your Grammys to actually go from a chest, take it to a table, craft a thing, take the product to a different chest, and then repeat, and keep doing that so that while you're gone, they will be taking your basic resources and turning them into more advanced processed resources, because a lot of these things take a while. A lot of the stuff that you can craft, especially like refinements of materials, they take maybe 30 or more seconds to actually craft just one of, so they're not things that you would want to sit there and do repeatedly over and over, especially when you might need several dozen of these things. That's going to take a while. So instead you want to automate this process and have your base set up in such a way that it's efficient for some Grammys at home to constantly be working on stuff. There are a couple of quirks to sort of take note of in the system. Like, there are chests that only hold one thing, and these are useful for when you're refining that one thing into various other resources. That way you have one box that you can put all of that basic raw resource and have your Grammys pull from. But there are also plenty of chests that hold multiple things, and in these cases the Grammys will only pay attention to what's in the first slot available. So if you have a Grammy programmed to grab some copper ore and transform it into copper bars at a furnace, then you need to make sure that the copper ore is either in a chest that is only copper ore, or that it's the first item in a multi-item chest. That way they know to grab it. Meanwhile, you'll of course be using all of these refined resources to craft yourself some gear, and you can have an armor set as well as various kinds of weapons and gathering tools, shields, some enchanted like rings and stuff that can up your stats and things, and also food. Food is very important. You don't need to eat to live in this game, but food gives you various buffs, and you definitely want these buffs. The main thing that food does is increase your maximum stamina and your maximum health, as well as give you some other stat increases. So you really want to have a good selection of food available for yourself so that you can buff yourself up before you go out exploring. And the way that it works is each biome has its own various resources that you can harvest from within it, as well as its own selection of enemies that have their own drops. And you're going to need these natural resources and these enemy drops to craft various things like new armor sets and new weapons and new crafting tables to use the newer sets of materials as well, because there are multiple tables and refining tables and stuff that you'll need to go through like in tiers basically to continue getting the current newest material. Like going from leather to copper to iron takes several different crafting stations. And as you're exploring through a biome, you'll also find different features of that biome that you'll need to pay attention to, like say big towers with enemy spawning crystals on the top of them, or portals to small dungeons that have chests and stuff in them to find. And these are important not only because they help you get a more reliable flow of those various resources that you'll need, but they also will give you a sort of biome-specific key item that you will need to spawn the boss of that biome. And you'll have to beat that biome's boss in order to actually move on to the next one effectively. Oftentimes because the next biome will simply have enemies that are too strong, or it will have some sort of environmental effect that is very harmful to you, like say a fog that prevents you from exploring at all until you beat the previous boss. Once you explore around and find several of these different sort of biome features and get several of these key items, you can then eventually find the boss spawning area for that biome. It'll be somewhere around, and there's a way to help you find that, but I'll get to that in just a second. Once you find this area, you can use 3 of those key items to spawn the boss. Sometimes this area will just be in the world and it'll spawn the boss into that area of the world. Sometimes it'll be a portal to a small arena where you spawn the boss instead. It sort of depends on the biome. The bosses are usually like, currently they seem to be 2-phase fights usually, and they have a lot of health, so the fights are usually relatively long, but once you beat them, you will unlock the ability to safely go to the next biome in line, and it will also drop some specific resources that only it will drop, including some sort of key crafting materials that you can often use to make some really, really good stuff, kind of like how a Terraria boss works a little bit. But I also mentioned a way to find the boss spawn, because you're not necessarily likely to come across this spawn naturally. You can absolutely just find it while exploring, but the biomes are really large, so your chances of actually just happening across it accidentally are not super high. So instead you have this world level system, and this is kind of what determines the average tier of materials and gear that you're able to currently craft, basically. You can get this analysis machine and you can plop just any item that you want basically into this machine, and it will give you this experience towards the next world level. And once you get enough experience by sacrificing enough items, your world level will go up. And every time it goes up, it unlocks a list of new things, including new crafting tables, or indeed the location of the next boss. It'll actually show you on your map and mark where that biome's boss is once you get to a certain threshold. So you want to constantly be increasing this world level just by exploring and bringing back valuable items and sort of putting them in this machine to get more experience. And different materials and stuff are of course worth different amounts, and a lot of the refined materials and more pristine stuff is worth a lot more. You can also find these discs and similar items that are basically entirely for putting in this machine. That's like their only purpose, and they're worth a ton. And you tend to find these by delving dungeons and going into the various features of each biome and defeating a bunch of enemies and stuff. So there's another good reason to go into as many of these as you can find, because not only are you harvesting those useful resources and materials for crafting and also the key items for spawning the boss, but you'll also find various things that you can plop into this machine to increase your world level quicker. And of course, once you get to like much higher world levels, then you'll be given better crafting stations that can use the materials from the next biome up. So you're kind of in this double progression system, basically, where part of the progression is beating bosses and getting to the next area in the map, but the other part of the progression is upping this world level to get the better crafting stations and stuff. Because if you up your world level a whole bunch too fast, then you'll end up with crafting stations that you can't use yet because you don't have the resources for them. But if you neglect that and you just progress throughout the world, then you'll end up getting a whole bunch of resources that you don't have the crafting stations for, so you can't use those either. So basically the progression in this game is twofold. It's based on these two different things that you do separately, and you want to keep them at roughly the same sort of pace as each other in order to always have the relevant gear for the next challenge. There is also a spooky biome, which I highly approve of and very much enjoy. A lot of its stuff looks really cool. Its materials and armor and stuff is cool looking, and the music in it is good, and the enemies are sort of adorable, and they're just fun to fight. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the spooky biome, and I would encourage the future biomes added in the early access campaign to be just as colorful and interesting as that one, because that one's really fun to go through and has a lot of really striking terrain features and stuff to look for, like these big haunted mansion looking places and stuff. So more of that is definitely a good thing. You'll find that the enemy variety is actually surprisingly good in this game already, each biome having quite a large selection of different enemies you can come across, as well as some enemies that have stars next to their name and will be a palette swap. They'll look a little bit different than other similar enemies, and those are just like elite versions basically. They're much more difficult, and I think they can have up to 3 stars next to their name, I think. And either way, stars just mean they're stronger and they hit harder, but they also tend to drop more of their materials and a lot more experience as well, because there is a leveling system for both you and your buddy. You do level up by gathering and killing enemies and bosses and things, and there is a very incomplete but currently partially implemented skill tree that allows you to spend level up points to strengthen both yourself and your buddy. One thing, speaking of early access, one thing I would definitely like to see is the ability to create paths for your Grammys back at home, because their pathfinding is kind of overly simplistic, and it sometimes leads to them getting stuck and failing their programming and stuff, because they sort of get stuck walking behind a hill and then get like lodged underneath a machine or something because they were trying to pass behind it to get to a chest to get a material to put in the machine, but they get stuck. This can also happen in the other direction, where they're going across your base rather than behind it, and sometimes just trying to cross between machines. Their simplistic pathfinding means they just sort of run in place occasionally and get stuck on things. So I would really like the ability to build paths and specifically path out how I want them to move from container to machine to container or whatever, to make sure that they're moving more efficiently and don't constantly get stuck, requiring me to move all my machines around. But overall, I would say that the current state of the game is pretty impressive. I like the idea of these heavily programmable party members, basically, that you can just have do all sorts of different things, and there's a lot of freedom in how you can program them, and you can sort of, load these templates to get used to how the system works, but soon enough you'll be programming them by hand to do much more specific jobs and stuff, because the game is really good at teaching you how to use the system, I feel, and the system is intuitive enough to reward experimentation with it, with that good sense of discovery of pressing play and having this thing work out exactly how you programmed it and feel really good about yourself. I will say that the updates so far have been pretty impressive, adding a good amount of bug fixes and new programming blocks to use and some other quality of life features and stuff, so that's always good to see. But the game is currently a little bit content light, I will say. As far as other sort of adjacent survivally crafty automation games, they often have quite a bit of content when they launch into early access. This one has a little bit less. It's only got like a couple of main biomes, like 3 main sort of biome progression paths right now, and there's a fair amount of stuff to craft and build and things like that, and there are good numbers of building blocks for making homes and getting a better system at your base of organizing things and stuff. So there's plenty to do, but it does need more content. So we'll see how that goes. But as it currently stands, I think it's worth its asking price if you're into automation games, especially because the survivally aspects are a little bit less developed right now, so you have to also be a fan of like the automation genre to really get the most out of this game. But if you are, then there's a good amount here to experiment with and have fun with. So I'll put the link in the description below this video to the Steam store page for Omega Crafter if you wish to check it out yourselves. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.